Behind the majestic walls of the Vatican, among sacred relics and priceless works of art, lies one of the world's most secretive financial systems. The Institute for Religious Works, the Vatican Bank, has become the center of international scandals. Billions of dollars pass through its accounts, leaving behind a trail of mysterious deaths, links to the Mafia, and corruption among the highest church hierarchs. Investigations are halted under pressure from influential forces. Reforms stall in the face of resistance. What secrets do the ancient vaults hold? Who is behind the financial machinations? And why is the truth so carefully guarded? Get ready to learn the shocking story of money, power, and crime at the heart of the Catholic world. If this investigation has opened your eyes to the hidden side of the Vatican, please support our channel by subscribing. We continue to reveal secrets that others keep silent about. Now for a question for discussion. Do you think true financial transparency is possible in the Vatican? Or is the system too deeply entrenched to change? Share your opinion in the comments. The Institute for Religious Works, known as the Vatican Bank, was established on June 27, 1942, by Pope Pius XII. Officially, its purpose was to manage the Holy See's funds and the Church's charitable foundations. But from its earliest years, this bank enjoyed unique privileges that made it an ideal tool for shady dealings. The Vatican is a sovereign state, with an area of only 44 hectares. But its financial institution is not subject to international banking rules and transparency standards. This tiny state within Rome has complete financial immunity. No external regulators can check accounts, request documents, or conduct audits. The secrecy of its operations is protected not only by banking secrecy, but also by the sacred status of the Church. Any attempt at interference could be interpreted as an infringement on religious freedom and sovereignty. From the outset, the Institute for Religious Works operated under special rules. Accounts were opened without the usual customer identification procedures. The sources of funds were not checked. Money movements were not recorded in public registers. All this created ideal conditions for those who wanted to hide the origin of their capital. After World War II, huge sums of unknown origin passed through the Vatican Bank. There was talk of Nazi gold, assets of fascist regimes, and funds stolen during the war. But it was impossible to prove anything. The walls of silence proved stronger than any fortifications. In the post-war decades, the Vatican actively expanded its financial influence. The Institute for Religious Works opened accounts for bishops, monastic orders, and charitable foundations around the world. These accounts received donations from believers, income from church real estate, and investment funds. But at the same time, a shadow side of its activities was developing. By the 1970s, the Vatican Bank had become a magnet for those seeking ways to circumvent tax laws, move capital out of their countries, and hide income from illegal activities. The bank's special status made it immune to law enforcement. An account in the Vatican meant absolute confidentiality. No one could find out how much money was in it, where it came from, or where it went. This was even stronger than Swiss banks, because the Vatican was backed not only by banking secrecy, but also by the sanctity of the Church. But how could a religious institution turn into a tool for financial fraud? The answer lies in the management structure itself. The Institute for Religious Works was formally subordinate to the Pope, but in reality, it was run by a group of cardinals and professional financiers. These people had enormous power and minimal oversight. They could make decisions about billion-dollar transactions without consulting anyone. The history of the Vatican Bank shows how good intentions can turn into corruption when there is a lack of transparency and accountability. What lies behind these ancient walls today? What secrets do the accounts of the Institute for Religious Works hold? On June 18, 1982, the body of Roberto Calvi was found under Blackfriars Bridge in London. This Italian banker, known as God's banker, was found hanged with bricks in his pockets and $15,000 in cash. The official version was suicide, but too much pointed to murder. Calvi headed Banco Ambrosiano, Italy's largest private bank, which had close ties to the Vatican Bank. A few days before his death, he fled Italy to escape prosecution. His bank collapsed, leaving a hole of $1.4 billion. The investigation revealed that a significant portion of these funds had passed through the accounts of the Institute for Religious Works. Banco Ambrosiano used the Vatican Bank as an intermediary to transfer money to offshore zones. Shell companies were set up in Panama, Luxembourg, and the Bahamas. Huge sums of money were pumped through them, the origin of which was impossible to trace. The Vatican acted as a guarantor for many transactions, providing so-called letters of patronage. These documents, signed by the leadership of the Institute for Religious Affairs, created the appearance of reliability for dubious transactions. When the pyramid collapsed, it became clear that the Vatican formally acknowledged responsibility for billions in debt, but refused to pay it. A key figure in this scandal was Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American of Lithuanian descent who headed the Vatican Bank from 1969 to 1989. This 6-foot-tall prelate, a former bodyguard to Pope Paul VI, turned the religious institution into a center for international financial fraud. Italian prosecutors issued an arrest warrant for Marcinkus, accusing him of aiding and abetting fraud and money laundering. But the Archbishop took refuge behind the walls of the Vatican, which the Italian police could not cross. The sovereignty of the tiny state protected the suspect in crimes worth billions of dollars. Calvi's connections extended far beyond the banking world. His name came up in investigations into the P2 Masonic Lodge, a secret organization that brought together politicians, military personnel, businessmen, and representatives of the special services. This lodge was involved in political conspiracies, terrorist attacks, and corruption schemes. And the Vatican Bank, it seems, served as a financial instrument for this shadow structure. Calvi's death remains a mystery. The initial verdict of suicide was overturned only in 2002, when an independent examination found evidence of murder. In 2005, 5 suspects stood trial, including the boss of the Sicilian Mafia. The prosecution's case was based on the theory that Calvi was killed because he knew too much about the Mafia's ties to the Vatican. However, all the suspects were acquitted due to lack of evidence. The Banco Ambrosiano case forced the Vatican to publicly acknowledge problems in the operation of its bank for the first time. The Institute for Religious Works paid $244 million to creditors of the bankrupt Banco Ambrosiano as a goodwill gesture, without admitting legal liability. This was only 1/6 of the total losses, but even such a payment was unprecedented for the Vatican. However, the real lessons of this scandal were never learned. The system of opaque operations continued to exist. Leaders changed. Promises of reform were made, but the fundamental principles of secrecy remained intact. Too many influential figures had a stake in maintaining the status quo. What other secrets did Roberto Calvi take with him? Who was behind his death? And why did the investigation come to a standstill? The mechanism for laundering money through the Vatican Bank is built on several levels of protection, each of which creates an additional barrier for investigators. The first level is the very structure of the Institute for Religious Works. Formally, it is not a bank in the usual sense, but a financial institution of the Church. This means that it is not required to follow the banking regulations that apply to commercial banks. There are no requirements to publish reports, disclose the structure of assets, or undergo external audits. Opening an account with the Vatican Bank is only available to certain categories of customers: clergy, Holy See diplomats, religious organizations, and a select few individuals. But it is precisely this selectivity that provides a loophole. Who decides who is worthy of becoming a customer? What criteria are applied? History shows that the bank's clients have included some very dubious individuals and organizations. The second level of protection is the use of front accounts and fictitious organizations. The money does not come directly from criminal groups or corrupt officials. It passes through a chain of charitable foundations, religious societies, and cultural associations. This creates an impression of legitimacy. A fund to help children in Latin America, a society for the preservation of Christian heritage in Eastern Europe, an association to support missionaries in Africa. All of these can be a cover for transferring dirty money. The third level is offshore companies. The Vatican Bank actively cooperated with banks and companies registered in tax havens: Panama, Liechtenstein, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg. Money was transferred there, ostensibly for investments or charitable projects. But the real ultimate beneficiaries of these funds remained hidden behind a multitude of corporate shells. The fourth level is real estate. Expensive real estate around the world was purchased through accounts at the Institute for Religious Affairs. Luxurious apartments in London, villas on the French Riviera, commercial real estate in Switzerland. Formally, the owner was listed as some religious foundation or monastic order. But in fact, these properties were used by completely different people. Real estate became a way to preserve capital and remove it from taxation. The fifth level was currency transactions. The Vatican Bank was able to convert currencies without the usual restrictions. This made it possible to circumvent the currency controls established in various countries. Large sums in one currency were deposited into accounts in the Vatican and left in another currency in a completely different jurisdiction. It was virtually impossible to track these flows. The sixth level is diplomatic privileges. Representatives of the Vatican enjoy diplomatic immunity. Their luggage is not checked at customs. They can transport large amounts of cash across borders without declaring it. There have been cases where Vatican diplomats have been detained with suitcases stuffed with millions of euros, but it has been impossible to prosecute them. The seventh level is a culture of secrecy. The Vatican has a centuries-old tradition of keeping secrets. Everything that happens behind closed doors stays inside. Employees of the Institute for Religious Affairs take a vow of silence regarding financial matters. Leaking information is considered not just a violation of professional ethics, but a betrayal of the Church. This omerta, or code of silence, is more reliable than any security system. All these levels together create a virtually impenetrable system. Even when suspicions or isolated facts arise, it is extremely difficult to prove anything. Documents are inaccessible. Witnesses remain silent, and jurisdiction is protected by sovereignty. How many billions have passed through this system? Who are the real beneficiaries? The answers to these questions are hidden in the safes of the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank's offshore accounts are a tangled maze that is almost impossible to navigate without insider information. Investigations by journalists and law enforcement agencies have revealed a network of hundreds of companies registered in various offshore zones that are in one way or another connected to the Institute for Religious Works. Let's start with Panama, a classic offshore jurisdiction. Dozens of companies whose accounts were held at the Vatican Bank were registered here. These companies existed only on paper. They had no offices, no employees, and no real economic activity. Their sole function was to serve as an intermediary for money transfers. Money came from one country, passed through a Panamanian company with an account in the Vatican, and then went to a completely different place. The trail was lost. Another scheme operated in Luxembourg. Investment funds were created there, formally managed by Vatican structures. These funds attracted funds from wealthy clients, promising reliability thanks to their connection with the Church. But analysis showed that the investment activity of these funds was minimal. Their main function was to accumulate large sums and then channel them through opaque channels. Part of the funds were returned to investors in the form of interest, creating the appearance of a legitimate business. The rest disappeared in an unknown direction. Liechtenstein, a tiny principality between Switzerland and Austria, is famous for its strict banking secrecy. Accounts were opened here in the names of Vatican prelates and religious organizations. A special feature of Liechtenstein is the institution of anonymous foundations, known as Anstalt. The owner of such a foundation can remain completely anonymous, with their name not appearing in any public registers. Several such funds with billions in assets had direct links to the Vatican Bank. The Cayman Islands were used for more complex structures. Holding companies were registered there, which owned other companies in different jurisdictions. The result was a multi-level pyramid, where each level added a layer of secrecy. It became impossible to track who ultimately controlled this structure and who owned the money. Switzerland, despite its reputation as a reliable financial center, also played a role in these schemes. The Vatican Bank maintained close relations with several Swiss private banks. These relationships were used to manage large portfolios whose owners remained unknown. Swiss bankers acted as trustees, managing assets on behalf of anonymous Vatican clients. Even within the European Union, there were loopholes. Cyprus, Malta, and Ireland offered low taxes and relatively lax regulation. Funds linked to the Vatican were pumped through companies registered there. Formally, everything looked legal, but the economic essence of these operations was far from the declared charitable goals. Of particular interest are accounts in Singapore and Hong Kong. These Asian financial centers attracted Vatican structures with the opportunity to work with Asian capital. It is believed that funds from China, South Korea, and the Philippines passed through the accounts of the Institute for Religious Affairs in Asian banks. The origin of this money raised questions, but it was impossible to verify. This entire offshore network functioned thanks to a simple principle. Each jurisdiction was protected by the secrecy of its laws, and at the center was the Vatican, with its absolute sovereignty. When the authorities of one country began an investigation, the trail led to another jurisdiction. When they tried to dig deeper there, it turned out that the real owner was in a third country. And in the end, everything came back to the Vatican, where no one had access. How much money is hidden in this labyrinth? What is the real value of the assets controlled through the Vatican Bank's offshore network? Real estate has become one of the key instruments in the Vatican Bank's schemes. Unlike cash in accounts, which exists in the form of numbers, real estate is a tangible asset that can be used, leased, or resold. At the same time, the real owners can remain in the shadows, hidden behind corporate structures and foundations. London has become one of the main destinations for Vatican real estate investments. Investigations in recent years have revealed that dozens of luxury properties in the British capital have been purchased through structures linked to the Institute for Religious Works. These are not modest church buildings, but luxurious apartments in prestigious areas. Apartments in Sloane Square worth several £1 million each, office buildings in the city, commercial real estate in Knightsbridge. The entire portfolio was valued at hundreds of millions. Formally, the owner was a British company. But if you dug deeper, it turned out that this company belonged to a fund registered in Luxembourg, which in turn was managed by a structure associated with the Vatican. Why does the Church need such expensive secular real estate? The official explanation was that it was an investment to ensure the long-term financial stability of the Holy See. But critics pointed out that the manner in which these properties were acquired raised serious questions. Were funds of dubious origin used for the purchases? Paris was another center of Vatican real estate. The Church has historically owned many buildings here, but in recent decades, its portfolio has expanded significantly. Luxury apartments on the Ile Saint-Louis, mansions in the 7th arrondissement, commercial premises on the Champs-Élysées. Interestingly, many of these properties were rented out at market rates, generating significant income. Where did this money go? It did not end up in the Vatican's official budgets. Switzerland was attractive not only for its banks but also for its stable real estate market. Expensive residences and commercial properties were purchased in Geneva and Zurich through Vatican structures. Swiss real estate is considered one of the most reliable investments in the world, retaining its value even during crises. But were these properties purchased with funds that were supposed to go to charity and religious needs? Italy, the Vatican's home country, was replete with church real estate. But here too there were oddities. Luxurious villas on the Amalfi Coast, penthouses in Milan, historic palazzos in Venice. All of these were listed under various religious organizations, but were not used for religious purposes at all. There are known cases when such properties were rented out for private parties, or even used by high-ranking clergy for personal recreation. In the United States, Vatican structures owned commercial real estate in New York, Washington, and Los Angeles. Office buildings, shopping centers, residential complexes. This entire portfolio generated millions of dollars in annual income. Management was carried out through American companies, but the ultimate beneficiaries were structures associated with the Institute for Religious Affairs. Latin America was of particular interest. Here the church traditionally had enormous influence and significant property holdings. But investigations revealed that, in addition to traditional church properties, there were shadow assets. Land plots in Argentina purchased at suspiciously low prices. Resort complexes in Brazil built with funds of unknown origin. All this real estate did not simply store value, it was involved in complex financial schemes. Properties were purchased. Their value was artificially inflated through fictitious transactions between related companies, and then they were used as collateral to obtain loans from regular banks. The loan proceeds went to unknown destinations, and the debt was eventually written off or restructured. What is the real value of the real estate portfolio controlled by the Vatican? How many of these assets were purchased with funds of dubious origin? The Vatican Bank's links to organized crime can be traced back to its inception, but reached their peak in the second half of the 20th century. The Italian Mafia, the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, and the Neapolitan Camorra. All these criminal groups have at various times used the Institute for Religious Works to launder their proceeds. The most well-documented connection is with the Sicilian Mafia. In the 1970s and 1980s, when Sicilian clans controlled the international heroin trade, they needed a mechanism to legalize their huge cash revenues. The Vatican Bank provided the perfect solution. Money from drug trafficking was deposited into accounts belonging to front religious organizations, then transferred through offshore companies and returned as supposedly legal investments. Michele Sindona, a Sicilian financier with deep ties to the Mafia, played a key role in these operations. Sindona was an advisor to the Vatican Bank and simultaneously worked for Mafia clans. He created a network of banks in Italy, Switzerland, and the United States, through which drug money was pumped. The Institute for Religious Works was the central link in this system. When Sindona's banking empire collapsed in the mid-1970s, it turned out that about $400 million had disappeared. Some of this money passed through Vatican accounts. Sindona was convicted in the US and Italy, but many details of his ties to the Vatican were never revealed. In 1986, he died in prison under mysterious circumstances, poisoned by cyanide that somehow ended up in his coffee. The 'Ndrangheta, the Calabrian Mafia, is considered today to be the richest and most powerful criminal organization in Europe. Its annual turnover is estimated at 50 billion euros. A significant portion of these funds comes from the cocaine trade from South America. Investigations have shown that the 'Ndrangheta used Vatican structures to invest its income. Millions were legalized through front construction companies and development projects formerly associated with the church. The practice of using charitable foundations seems particularly cynical. Mafia clans created funds to help the poor, rebuild churches, and support orphans. These funds received donations. In fact, dirty money from criminal activities. The funds were then transferred to accounts at the Institute for Religious Works under the guise of charitable contributions. After that, the money could be used for legal investments. The scheme worked flawlessly. There were documented cases of personal communication between Vatican Bank executives and Mafia bosses. Meetings were held in Sicily to discuss financial issues. Church hierarchs attended celebrations organized by Mafia families. These connections were not casual acquaintances. They represented a system of mutually beneficial cooperation. The Mafia got a money laundering mechanism, and church financiers got commissions and a share in profitable projects. Russian organized crime also found its way to the Vatican Bank after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, when billions of dollars were being withdrawn from Russia, some of these funds passed through accounts at the Institute for Religious Affairs. Funds were created to support Orthodox churches, restore temples, and help believers in the post-Soviet space. Under this cover, money of dubious origin was legalized. Latin American drug cartels controlling cocaine production were also looking for ways to launder their profits. Colombian, Mexican, and Bolivian criminal groups used religious organizations as a cover. The money was supposedly going to build churches, schools, and hospitals in poor areas. In reality, only minimal construction took place, and the bulk of the funds ended up in accounts linked to the Vatican. Chinese triads involved in human trafficking, drugs, and counterfeiting also discovered opportunities to use Vatican structures. Income from organized crime was laundered through Catholic missions in Asia. Formally, these were donations for the spread of Christianity in China. But in reality, they were the legalization of criminal proceeds. Why did the church allow this? Were church hierarchs aware of the origin of the money, or did they deliberately turn a blind eye, receiving their share? The history of the Vatican Bank is marked by a series of mysterious deaths of people who knew too much or tried to reveal the truth. Each of these deaths was officially explained as an accident or suicide, but the circumstances raised serious doubts. We have already mentioned Roberto Calvi. His body under Blackfriars Bridge became a symbol of the danger posed by knowledge of the Vatican's financial secrets. But he was not the first, nor would he be the last. In 1982, a few days before Calvi's death, his secretary, Graziella Corrobore, was found dead. She fell from the window of her apartment in Milan. The police considered it a suicide, although she had no apparent reason for such an act. Corrobore had access to all of Calvi's documents on the links between Banco Ambrosiano and the Vatican Bank. The day before her death, she told a friend that she feared for her life, but did not explain why. Michele Sindona, a financier mafioso and Vatican advisor, died of cyanide poisoning in his prison cell on March 22, 1986. The official version was suicide. But how did the cyanide get into a secure prison? Sindona was preparing to testify about his ties to the Vatican and the Mafia. His death came just before the scheduled interrogation. Too convenient a coincidence. In the summer of 2012, Ettore Gotti Tedeschi, former president of the Vatican Bank, was found dead in his office. The official cause of death was a heart attack. But Gotti Tedeschi was relatively young and had no serious health problems. Shortly before his death, he was dismissed from his position as chairman of the bank, allegedly for incompetence. Many believed that the real reason was that he was too insistent on implementing reforms and making the bank's activities transparent. His computer and documents disappeared from his office after his death. In 2013, journalist Francesco Moroni, who was investigating the Vatican's financial machinations, died under strange circumstances. His car veered off a mountain road in Calabria and fell into a ravine. An examination showed that the brake system had been damaged, but the police considered this to be the result of an accident rather than sabotage. A week before his death, Moroni published an article about the 'Ndranghetta's ties to the Vatican Bank. Paolo Cirino Palmicino, an Italian politician who was deeply knowledgeable about the Vatican's financial affairs, died in 2012 of pneumonia. His death would not have aroused suspicion if it weren't for one circumstance. A month earlier, he had stated in an interview that he was preparing an exposé on corruption in the Vatican. After his death, the manuscript disappeared. His family claimed that it was kept in his safe, but when the safe was opened, there was nothing compromising inside. On May 29, 1998, a tragedy occurred in the Swiss Guard barracks. The commander of the guard, Colonel Alois Estermann, and his wife were shot dead. The official version was that they were shot by a young guard who then committed suicide. The motive was said to be personal animosity and mental illness on the part of the guard. But some researchers pointed out that Estermann had learned of financial fraud within the Vatican shortly before his death and was going to report it to the Pope. Archbishop Paul Marcinus, the longtime head of the Vatican Bank, died in 2006 in Arizona, where he had been living since leaving the Vatican. His death was natural. He was 84 years old. But what is remarkable is that in the 20 years he spent in the United States, Marcinkus never gave an interview or wrote his memoirs. The man who knew all the secrets of the Vatican Bank took them with him to the grave. Lawyer Giorgio Ambrosoli investigated the bankruptcy of Michele Sindona's banks. On July 11, 1979, he was shot dead by an unknown killer near his home in Milan. The day before his death, he gave a friend an envelope marked, "To be opened in the event of my death." The envelope contained documents about Sindona's ties to the Vatican Bank and the Mafia. The killer was never found. All these deaths have one thing in common. The victims knew about the Vatican's financial secrets. Coincidence? Or a system for eliminating inconvenient witnesses? The list continues into the 21st century. In 2017, Italian businessman Gianluigi Torzi disappeared under mysterious circumstances. He was an intermediary in real estate deals involving the Vatican Bank. He was last seen at Rome Airport. 3 months later, his car was found at the bottom of a lake. His body was never found. The police considered it an accident, but Torzi's friends claimed that he feared revenge from influential church circles. Swiss banker René Brulhart headed the Vatican's Financial Supervisory Authority from 2012 to 2019. After leaving office, he began writing a book about what he had seen inside the Vatican's finances. In 2020, he was involved in a car accident in Switzerland. He survived, but suffered a serious head injury and lost his memory of his last years of work. The manuscript of the book disappeared from his home while he was hospitalized. The fate of those who tried to investigate the Vatican's finances from the outside is telling. Journalists received threats. Their sources inside the Vatican suddenly stopped communicating. Documents submitted for publication mysteriously disappeared. Newspaper editors were pressured by influential Catholic organizations. In some countries, investigations were halted at the government level under the pretext of the inadmissibility of interference in the affairs of a sovereign state. Lawyers representing victims of Vatican financial fraud faced professional problems. They were stripped of their licenses for formal reasons. Clients refused their services after receiving mysterious phone calls. Some received direct threats. An Italian lawyer who was handling a case against the Institute for Religious Works was beaten up by unknown assailants in a dark alley. The attackers did not take any money or valuables, but they did take his briefcase containing documents related to the case. The police never found the perpetrators. Former employees of the Vatican Bank who decided to tell the truth constitute a special category. Almost all of them faced serious consequences. Careers were ruined, reputations were tarnished, and personal lives became unbearable. One former financial analyst at the Institute for Religious Works, who agreed to testify to the Italian prosecutor's office, was forced to leave Italy and live under an assumed name in another country. He claimed to have received death threats. Can it be proven that an organized system is behind all these deaths and accidents? There is no direct evidence, but the statistical probability that so many people connected to the same issue would die under suspicious circumstances is extremely low. Coincidences happen, but when there are too many of them, they cease to be accidental. Who gives the orders? Is there a structure within the Vatican that deals with the elimination of inconvenient witnesses? Or are criminal groups whose interests are affected by the investigations behind it? There are no answers, only questions and a long list of dead people. July 2013 was marked by one of the biggest revelations in the history of the Vatican. Italian journalist Gianluigi Nuzzi published the book His Holiness, based on thousands of pages of secret documents from the Vatican. This leak, dubbed VatiLeaks, lifted the veil on the Holy See's shady financial dealings. The documents were given to Nuzzi by Paolo Gabriele, Pope Benedict XVI's personal butler. Gabriele claimed that he acted out of good intentions, wanting to help the Pope see the corruption surrounding him. Among the leaked materials were internal memos, financial reports, correspondence between cardinals, and documents on questionable transactions by the Vatican Bank. The published documents revealed large-scale abuses in the management of Vatican finances, inflated prices for contractors' services, kickbacks on purchases, distribution of contracts among companies linked to relatives of high-ranking church officials. One of the documents showed how a simple renovation of premises cost the Vatican 5 times more than the market price. The difference ended up in the pockets of intermediaries. Particular attention was drawn to materials about the internal struggle between supporters of reform and defenders of the old system. According to the documents, Pope Benedict XVI tried to bring order to the finances, but met with fierce resistance. A group of influential cardinals systematically sabotaged his efforts. They blocked the appointment of reformers to key posts, spread misinformation, and created an atmosphere of mistrust around those who tried to change the system. The documents revealed details of specific operations of the Institute for Religious Affairs. One memo described the transfer of 20 million euros to the accounts of unknown beneficiaries through a chain of offshore companies. The official purpose of the payment was listed as charitable aid, but the actual recipients had nothing to do with charity. Another document revealed a scheme involving real estate in London. Vatican entities purchased buildings through Italian intermediary Raffaele Mincioni, who inflated the price by 30%. The tens of millions of euros in overpayments ended up in the pockets of a group of people connected to the highest church hierarchs. The leak also revealed a mechanism for influencing appointments within the Vatican. The documents contained correspondence discussing the distribution of positions in exchange for loyalty in financial matters. Cardinals haggled over positions, promised patronage, and formed alliances. All this was more reminiscent of the political intrigues of a secular state than the work of a religious institution. The Vatican's reaction was harsh. Paolo Gabriele was arrested and tried. He received 18 months in prison for stealing the documents. The Pope later pardoned him, but Gabriele's career and life were ruined. He was portrayed as a traitor, a mentally unstable person. However, many saw him as a hero who risked himself for the sake of truth. The Vatican tried to minimize the damage from the publication. Official representatives claimed that the documents had been taken out of context, that the journalist had misinterpreted them, and that much of it was exaggerated. But the documents themselves were authentic. This was not disputed. Attempts to explain the scandalous facts seemed unconvincing. The VatiLeaks affair had serious consequences. Many historians believe that it was one of the reasons for Pope Benedict XVI's resignation in February 2013. The 85-year-old pontiff may have realized that he was powerless to overcome the system of corruption that had taken root in the Vatican. His departure was the first voluntary resignation of a pope in 600 years. With the arrival of Pope Francis in March 2013, a new phase began. The new pontiff announced his intention to carry out radical reforms. New supervisory bodies were created, control over finances was strengthened, and transparency was promised. But how profound were these reforms? Did the system change fundamentally, or were these cosmetic measures to appease the public? The Vatileaks leak showed that there are people within the Church who are willing to take risks for the sake of truth. But it also demonstrated the power of a system capable of protecting itself even after revelations. How many more secrets are kept in the Vatican archives? Corruption in the Vatican is not limited to the activities of nameless financiers. Investigations in recent decades have revealed the direct involvement of senior church hierarchs, including cardinals, in dubious financial schemes. These people, dressed in purple robes and enjoying enormous authority among the faithful, were found to be involved in fraud amounting to millions of euros. Cardinal Angelo Becciu, who held influential positions in the Vatican for many years, became a central figure in one of the biggest financial scandals. From 2011 to 2018, he was the Vatican's Deputy Secretary of State, effectively the second most powerful person in the church hierarchy after the Pope. In 2018, Becciu was made a cardinal, but just 2 years later, an investigation revealed his involvement in dubious deals. The main accusation concerned investments in luxury real estate in the Chelsea district of London. The Vatican invested 350 million euros in the purchase of a luxury building. The deal was conducted through intermediaries, who received huge commissions. Cardinal Becciu approved these payments, even though the terms were clearly disadvantageous to the Vatican. It is suspected that part of the money returned to him personally through a complex kickback scheme. In September 2020, Pope Francis stripped Becciu of all privileges and rights associated with the cardinalate. This unprecedented decision demonstrated the seriousness of the charges. In July 2021, the trial began. Becciu was accused of embezzlement, abuse of office, and perjury. The trial is still ongoing. Cardinal George Pell, an Australian who served as prefect of the Secretariat for the Economy of the Vatican from 2014 to 2017, attempted to implement financial reforms. He demanded complete transparency, insisted on centralized control of all Vatican finances, and wanted to eliminate shadow funds. But his efforts were met with fierce resistance. Influential cardinals sabotaged the reforms, spread rumors, and undermined Pell's authority. As a result, he was recalled to Australia, where he was charged with sexual assault, dating back to the 1990s. Pell was convicted, but the Australian High Court later overturned the verdict, finding the evidence insufficient. Many believe the charges were a way to get rid of an inconvenient reformer. Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, Vatican Secretary of State from 2006 to 2013, also found himself at the center of a scandal. After retiring, he moved into a luxurious 700-square-meter apartment in the Vatican. The apartment was renovated at the expense of a children's hospital charity. The public was outraged. Money collected for the treatment of sick children was used to fund luxurious accommodation for a high-ranking prelate. Bertone denied any wrongdoing, but the scandal dealt a serious blow to his reputation. Italian cardinals Giuseppe Versaldi, Giovanni Angelo Becciu, and Francesco Calloia controlled various Vatican financial structures in the 2000s. All three faced accusations of opaque management of funds at different times. Funds were created with vague objectives, investments were made without proper oversight, and expenditures were approved without reasonable explanation. When accountability was demanded, excuses were made about the complexity of church finances and the need for confidentiality. A telling example is the story of the St. Peter's Fund, officially created to support papal initiatives. The fund's resources were used for a variety of purposes, not always related to its stated mission. Some of the money went to maintain luxurious residences for retired cardinals, expensive cars, and first-class trips abroad. When Pope Francis tried to put things in order, it turned out that the documentation was extremely sloppy, and it was impossible to trace many of the expenditures. Another scheme involved donations from wealthy Catholics. Large sums of money transferred directly to cardinals for church needs often did not appear in official reports. This money existed in a gray area where the usual rules of control did not apply. The cardinals disposed of it at their own discretion. Some of it went to charity, but a significant portion was used for personal enrichment or to finance political intrigues within the Vatican. Why are people who have dedicated their lives to serving God involved in corruption? Power corrupts even those who started out with good intentions. And the lack of real control turns the Vatican into a place where violations become the norm. Since his election in March 2013, Pope Francis has repeatedly spoken of the need for radical financial reform in the Vatican. The first pontiff from Latin America, he came with a reputation as a man who shunned luxury and was close to the poor. His program included putting the Church's finances in order, eradicating corruption, and establishing transparency. But the implementation of these promises has met with powerful resistance. One of the first steps was the creation in 2013 of a special commission to reform the Institute for Religious Works. The commission included international experts in banking and anti-money laundering. Their task was to assess the scale of the problems and propose solutions. The commission's work revealed thousands of accounts opened in violation of customer identification procedures. Many of the accounts belonged to people who had no connection to the Church. The commission recommended closing suspicious accounts and tightening the rules for opening new ones. In 2014, the Pope appointed Cardinal George Pell as prefect of the new Secretariat for the Economy, which was designed to centralize control over all of the Vatican's financial assets. Pell began an inventory of property and accounts. He discovered billions of euros that even the Pope did not know existed. These funds were held in the accounts of various Vatican departments and institutions, which disposed of them without control. Pell's attempt to centralize management was met with fierce resistance. Department heads did not want to lose control over their money. Intrigues began, and rumors spread about Pell's abuse of power. Influential cardinals complained to the Pope that the reforms were too radical and were destroying the traditional management structure. As a result, Pell's powers were curtailed, and he soon left the Vatican. In 2016, Pope Francis created the Council of Cardinals, a group of 9 cardinals from different countries, to assist him in governing the Church and implementing reforms. Financial issues were at the center of their discussions. But even within this council, there was no unity. Some cardinals supported radical reforms, while others insisted on caution and the preservation of traditions. Compromises led to half-hearted decisions. In 2018, the Vatican adopted new laws on transparency in public procurement and the fight against money laundering. The requirements for financial reporting by all Vatican institutions were tightened. Internal control mechanisms were created. On paper, everything looked impressive. But the actual implementation of these laws left much to be desired. Officials found ways to circumvent the new rules, exploiting loopholes in the legislation, or simply ignoring the requirements. The London real estate scandal that erupted in 2019 showed that the problems had not gone away. Despite all the reforms, Vatican funds continued to be used in questionable transactions. 350 million euros were lost as a result of investments approved by high-ranking officials after the reforms had already begun. The Pope was furious. Several people were fired and arrested, but this only highlighted how deeply rooted the system of corruption was. In 2020, Pope Francis issued an apostolic letter strengthening his personal control over Vatican finances. From then on, all investments exceeding a certain amount required his personal approval. A new supervisory body with expanded powers was created. But even these measures were met with criticism within the Vatican. There was talk of excessive centralization of power, distrust of its own officials, and bureaucratization of processes. Transparency International, an international anti-corruption organization, continues to criticize the Vatican. Reports from 2021 and 2022 noted that despite the declared reforms, real transparency remains extremely low. The Vatican still does not publish complete financial statements, does not disclose the structure of its assets, and does not undergo independent external audits. promises remain promises. The main problem lies in the culture of secrecy and resistance to change. Many in the Vatican sincerely believe that the Church should be protected from external control, that the financial affairs of the Holy See are an internal matter that does not concern anyone outside. This position makes real reform almost impossible. In addition, too many influential people have a vested interest in maintaining the existing system because they benefit from it. Will Pope Francis, who is already 88 years old, be able to see the reforms through to the end? Or will everything return to the way it was before, after he leaves? Transparency International regularly publishes assessments of transparency and corruption in various countries and organizations. The Vatican, despite its unique status as a religious state, has not escaped the scrutiny of this organization. Reports from recent years paint an alarming picture of financial opacity in the Holy See. In the 2021 report, the Vatican received an extremely low rating on financial transparency criteria. The organization noted the lack of public reporting on income and expenses. Unlike most modern states and even private corporations, the Vatican does not disclose detailed information about its finances. Only a brief summary is published, which does not give a real idea of the scale and structure of its assets. The lack of an independent external audit is another serious drawback. The Vatican's finances are audited by internal auditors who are themselves part of the church hierarchy. This creates an obvious conflict of interest. Transparency International insists that to ensure real transparency, an audit by an international auditing company independent of the Vatican is necessary. But the Church refuses to do so on the pretext of sovereignty. The ownership structure of Vatican assets remains opaque. It is not known how much real estate belongs to the Holy See and where it is located. What is the total value of the investment portfolio? Which companies and funds are controlled by Vatican structures? There are no public answers to any of these questions. The information is considered an internal matter of the Church. Of particular concern is the continuing activity that does not comply with international anti-money laundering standards. Despite the adoption of new laws, the Vatican does not fully comply with the recommendations of the FATF, an international group fighting financial crime. Requirements for customer identification, verification of the sources of funds, and monitoring of suspicious transactions formally exist, but their implementation remains questionable. The 2022 report recorded cases where Vatican financial institutions continued to work with accounts that raised suspicions. The publication of information about questionable transactions was followed by assurances of an investigation, but no concrete results were made public. It seemed that the checks were carried out to reassure the public, rather than to actually identify violations. Transparency International also identified a conflict of interest in financial management. People who make decisions about investments and the disposal of funds often have personal or family ties to the companies that receive contracts. Mechanisms to prevent such conflicts either do not exist or do not work. When questions arise, the standard response is to refer to the trustworthiness and integrity of church officials. But history shows that trust alone is not enough. The organization notes resistance to change within the Vatican system. Despite Pope Francis's declarations of reform, conservative forces within the Curia are sabotaging attempts to establish real transparency. Various tactics are used, delaying the implementation of decisions, formal compliance with the letter of the law while violating its spirit, discrediting reformers, and appealing to church traditions. As a result, the changes remain superficial. Pressure on the Vatican is also coming from the financial community. European banks working with Vatican structures are increasingly demanding compliance with international standards. Some banks have refused to cooperate with the Institute for Religious Works because of reputational risks. This is forcing the Vatican to take some steps. But are they sufficient? Transparency International recommends several specific measures. full disclosure of financial statements, independent external auditing, publication of a register of all assets, implementation of effective mechanisms to control conflicts of interest, and creation of an independent body to investigate financial violations. However, the likelihood that the Vatican will accept these recommendations in full remains low. In its 2023 report, the organization stated, "The Vatican continues to be one of the most opaque financial structures in the world. The reforms that have been announced have not led to any significant changes. Covert activity continues, and resistance to real transparency remains strong." This assessment contrasts sharply with the Vatican's image as a moral authority. How can an institution, called upon to bring ethical values to the world itself, violate the basic principles of financial integrity? This paradox undermines the trust of many believers in the Church. Will the Vatican ever meet the standards of transparency that it preaches to others? When investigations into the Vatican's financial machinations reach a critical point, they suddenly stop. This pattern has been repeated for decades. Prosecutors encounter sudden obstacles, key witnesses change their testimony, documents disappear, and political pressure forces cases to be closed. The mechanisms of this pressure are varied and sophisticated. Italy, which surrounds the Vatican, is in a special position. The Italian government has historically maintained close relations with the Holy See. The Lateran Treaty of 1929 cemented the special status of the Church in Italy. Any serious investigation against the Vatican creates diplomatic tension. When Italian prosecutors start digging too deep, calls from the foreign ministry follow. The case becomes delicate. Procedural actions are delayed. In some cases, investigations are transferred to special units, where they are quietly shelved. A case in point is the 2010 incident when the Italian financial police froze 23 million euros in Vatican bank accounts in Italian banks. The suspicions concerned violations of anti-money laundering legislation. The investigation began energetically, with documents requested and witnesses questioned. But after a few months, the case stalled. The funds were unfrozen, and the investigation was quietly closed without any public explanation. Sources in the prosecutor's office spoke of pressure from the highest levels of government. International investigations face the problem of jurisdiction. The Vatican is a sovereign state. No foreign law enforcement agency can conduct a search there, seize documents, or question witnesses without the consent of the Vatican authorities, and such consent is almost never given. Requests for legal assistance go unanswered, or receive formal replies. As a result, investigations run into the wall of sovereignty. The Swiss authorities have launched several investigations into suspicious transactions linked to the Vatican. But each time, the cases were closed at an early stage. Swiss banking secrecy and traditions of confidentiality played a role, but even more important were political considerations. Switzerland values its relationship with the Vatican. The Church has significant assets in Swiss banks. A conflict would be economically disadvantageous. The United States, which has powerful instruments of international financial control at its disposal, also avoids putting serious pressure on the Vatican. The American Catholic community numbers 70 million people. It is an influential political force. Any president or member of Congress who tries to run roughshod over the Vatican risks losing the support of Catholic voters. Therefore, investigations by U.S. financial regulators into Vatican structures are extremely limited. Another mechanism of pressure is the Church's influence on public opinion. When publications about financial scandals appear, the Church mobilizes its supporters. Authoritative Catholic figures speak out in defense of the Vatican, accusing critics of bias and anti-religious motives. A narrative of attacks on the Church is created. In countries with strong Catholic traditions, this works effectively. Politicians and officials do not want to appear to be enemies of religion. Direct threats also occur. Investigative journalists receive warnings. Sometimes these are anonymous calls and letters. In other cases, they are official lawsuits to protect honor and dignity. The Vatican has powerful legal resources at its disposal. Court cases drag on for years, draining journalists' finances and morale. Even if the court ultimately sides with the journalist, the process itself serves to punish and intimidate others. Prosecutors who show excessive zeal in investigations against the Vatican face career problems. They are transferred to other areas, deprived of resources, and subjected to disciplinary reviews. This is particularly noticeable in the Italian system, where the appointment of prosecutors has political overtones. A prosecutor who has soured relations with the Church is unlikely to advance in his career. Within the Vatican itself, those who attempt to conduct genuine investigations are quickly neutralized. Internal commissions are created that work for years without producing any results. The guilty parties are inside the system, and the investigators are also inside the system. The conflict of interest is obvious. As a result, even when the Pope sincerely wants to get to the bottom of things, the machinery of bureaucracy and mutual cover-ups makes it impossible. The story of the investigation into the London real estate scandal is telling. In 2019, investigations began into a deal in which the Vatican lost hundreds of millions of euros. Several people were arrested and documents were seized. But the process is moving extremely slowly. Court hearings are being postponed, and procedural obstacles are appearing. The defendants' lawyers are using every possible loophole, and the main figures behind the scheme remain in the shadows. International financial organizations could exert pressure, but they are acting cautiously. Excluding the Vatican from the international payment system is technically possible, but politically unthinkable. It would cause a storm of protest in the Catholic world. Therefore, they limit themselves to mild recommendations and expressions of concern. The protection system works at all levels, from street priests who refuse to comment on scandals, to senior diplomats who block investigations, from journalists who practice self-censorship for fear of the consequences, to politicians who avoid tough questions. The result is predictable. Investigations are halted, the guilty are not punished, and the system continues to exist. The scale of financial flows through the Vatican Bank is staggering. The exact figures remain classified, but investigations and information leaks allow us to form a rough picture. We are talking about tens of billions of dollars that pass through the accounts of the Institute for Religious Works every year. According to experts, the Vatican's official assets alone amount to between $15 and $20 billion. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. Unofficial assets, hidden through offshore structures and shell companies, may exceed this amount several times over. Some researchers cite a figure of $70 billion. Others believe that the real value of all assets controlled in one way or another by Vatican structures exceeds $100 billion. The annual turnover of the Institute for Religious Works, according to conservative estimates, is about 6 billion euros. This money comes from various sources: donations from believers, income from real estate, investment profits, and fees for services. But where exactly do these funds go? The full picture is not available. Part of it goes to maintaining church structures, employee salaries, and charity, but a significant portion disappears into opaque channels. One of the largest items of shadow spending is investment through offshore funds. Every year, hundreds of millions of euros are transferred to the accounts of companies registered in tax havens. Formally, this is investment activity for profit. In reality, a significant portion of this money ends up in the pockets of intermediaries and related parties. Real estate is another channel for the movement of funds. In London alone, Vatican structures own real estate worth more than £1 billion. In Paris, the portfolio is estimated at several hundred million euros. Add to this Rome, Geneva, New York, and other cities, and you have a huge real estate empire. Rental income is estimated at tens of millions annually. But this money is not reflected in the Vatican's official accounts. Links to organized crime brought in additional cash flows. In the 1980s, when the Sicilian Mafia controlled the heroin route between Asia and the US, hundreds of millions of drug dollars were laundered through the Vatican Bank every year. Today, the scale may be smaller, but the schemes continue to operate. The Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, with an annual turnover of 50 billion euros, uses church structures to legalize part of its income. Even if only 1% of this amount passes through the Vatican, that is 500 million euros per year. Latin American drug cartels, Russian criminal groups, Chinese triads, all of them have used Vatican channels to one degree or another. In total, this could amount to billions of dollars in dirty money that has been given a respectable appearance through its connection to the Church. Corruption within the Vatican itself eats up huge amounts of money. Overpriced contractors, kickbacks on purchases, fictitious consulting services. These are classic embezzlement schemes. According to estimates by internal auditors that have leaked to the press, annual losses from corruption range from 200 to 300 million euros. This is an official estimate. The real figures may be higher. Political influence also costs money. The Vatican spends significant funds on lobbying for its interests in various countries, financing pro-Catholic political movements, supporting loyal media outlets, paying for the services of influential law firms. These expenses are not publicized, but they are substantial. Some experts estimate them at tens of millions of euros annually. The Vatican is at the center of a global network of financial and political ties that extend far beyond the religious sphere. The Institute for Religious Works serves not only as the Church's bank, but also as an instrument of geopolitical influence. These ties have been formed over decades and encompass governments, special services, and international corporations. During the Cold War, the Vatican played an important role in the fight against communism. The CIA used Vatican channels to finance anti-communist movements in Eastern Europe and Latin America. The money went through accounts at the Institute for Religious Works, disguised as charitable aid to Catholic communities. Poland's Solidarity movement received support through these channels in the 1980s. Millions of dollars were transferred through the Vatican Bank to the trade union movement that undermined the communist regime. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Vatican actively promoted its interests in the post-Soviet space. Huge sums of money were directed towards the restoration of Catholic structures in the Baltic states, Ukraine, and Belarus. But at the same time, ties were established with new capitalists and politicians. The Russian oligarchs of the 1990s were looking for ways to legalize their fortunes and gain respectability. The Vatican provided such an opportunity. Large donations to the Church, investments in religious projects, and participation in charity work under the auspices of the Holy See all created a positive image. At the same time, billions of dollars of dubious origin were laundered. Latin America is a special area of influence for the Vatican. Here, the Church has historically wielded enormous power. In some countries, Catholic structures have practically merged with the state apparatus. The Vatican Bank worked with dubious regimes, helping political elites to move capital out of the country. There are known cases of Latin American dictators holding personal accounts at the Institute for Religious Works. Italian politics is deeply intertwined with Vatican interests. The Christian Democratic Party, which dominated Italy after World War II, received funding through church channels. The Vatican influenced election results by supporting favored candidates. This system of patronage continues today, albeit in a less overt form. Italian politicians of all stripes maintain ties with the Vatican, understanding the importance of church support. Links with international business are no less important. Large corporations use Vatican channels to optimize taxes and confidential financial transactions. Italian industrial groups, European banks, and American funds have all worked with the Institute for Religious Works at various times. In return, they received not only financial services, but also the political patronage of the Church in the countries where they operated. Relations with the special services of various countries are a particularly closed chapter. The Vatican has a unique intelligence network through its priests and missionaries around the world. This information is valuable to intelligence services. It is known that Italian, American, and British special services maintained contacts with Vatican structures, and the financial opacity of the Institute for Religious Works made it a convenient tool for operations that were not supposed to leave any traces. The future of the Vatican's financial secrets remains uncertain. On the one hand, pressure on the Church is mounting. International organizations are demanding transparency. The media continues to investigate, and the number of supporters of reform within the Church itself is growing. On the other hand, the forces interested in maintaining the status quo are extremely influential. They control key positions in the Vatican hierarchy and are not going to give up. Pope Francis, who is already 88 years old, is not eternal. His successor may continue the reforms, or he may roll them back. The election of a new pope is traditionally held in secrecy. The cardinals gather in a conclave and elect the pontiff by secret ballot. But behind this solemn procedure lies a fierce political struggle. Different factions within the College of Cardinals promote their own candidates. Financial issues play an important role in this confrontation. Those cardinals who have benefited from the opaque system will vote for a conservative candidate. Reformers will try to bring a supporter of change to power. The outcome is unpredictable. Technological changes are creating new challenges for Vatican secrecy. Digital traces of financial transactions are more difficult to hide than paper documents. Blockchain and cryptocurrencies simultaneously provide new opportunities for anonymity and new tracking tools. The Vatican is trying to adapt, but digitization is making complete secrecy increasingly difficult. The younger generation of Catholics is more critical of the institutional Church. Surveys show that many young believers demand greater openness and honesty from the Church. Financial scandals repel them. If the Church wants to maintain its influence on new generations, it will have to change. But is the conservative hierarchy ready for such changes? Pressure from the financial system will grow. The international banking community is becoming less tolerant of opaque structures. The reputational risks of working with the Vatican could lead to further isolation of the Institute for Religious Works. This will force the Church to either adopt international standards or retreat into even greater secrecy, using alternative financial channels. The legal systems of various countries are also evolving. Anti-money laundering laws are becoming stricter. Beneficial ownership requirements make it more difficult to hide the real owners of assets. Offshore jurisdictions are disclosing information under international pressure. All this creates a less favorable environment for shadow operations. But will the Vatican find new loopholes? An alternative scenario is complete transformation. The Vatican could voluntarily adopt maximum transparency, publish full financial statements, undergo an independent audit, and disclose all assets. This would shock the world and restore the moral authority of the Church. But the likelihood of such a development is extremely low. There are too many skeletons in the closet. Full disclosure could lead to criminal investigations, lawsuits, and political scandals. Those who made the decision to take such a step would risk destroying the entire system.